couple of questions on here, and Mr. Mahoney, I'll start with you. Looking at some of the issues around around Huawei and sort of a competitive disadvantage that's been created there due to Chinese activities. Can you talk a little bit about what the major barriers are to companies like Microsoft and others as it relates to cloud computing on the continent, and what do you think should be done to make sure that U.S. companies are able to compete fairly on the continent?
Well, thank you very much for the question, Congressman. As I noted in my written testimony, we're seeing a lot of investment from Chinese cloud companies in Africa. I think Huawei has done something like 70 deals in over 41 countries. And if you just look at the map of where Chinese cloud companies are versus U.S. companies have invested in 3 countries so far, and you see Chinese companies investing in over a dozen. I think it was really a kind of a question of focus. This has been an area where China, with the support of the Chinese government, incidentally, is really focused in expanding its cloud network. So I think what is needed in order to turn this around is a U.S. strategy to expand our own presence in the cloud computing market in this area. I think U.S. companies have a lot. We have the technology. We have a lot of capital. I think what would help, though, would be a partnership with the federal government to look at markets, look where we can be competitive. Support from the commercial service, from U.S. embassies. There could probably also be some role for the DFC and other U.S. development agencies to provide capital for some projects. One of the things we're also seeing is that a lot of the investment that the Chinese are putting into this area is in the public sector, which is something that is concerning because the public sector is oftentimes the first sector that goes to the cloud, and then the private sector can follow. So I think this is a key part of the technology ecosystem in Africa, and if we want to be relevant there in the future, it's something that needs to be a focus, not only for companies like Microsoft, but for the U.S. government as well.
A quick follow-up question on that. You mentioned U.S. embassies in Africa. Do we have a security issue here with U.S. embassies having to use infrastructure in a given country that's owned, that's been put in by Huawei? I mean, how do we get around that, or do we have a national security problem when we have to operate on their networks? Or are we operating? I just don't know how that works. Or do we have closed networks that we don't have to deal with? Or what about American companies that are having to operate there? Are they less secure because they're operating on Chinese networks?
Well, Congressman, I'd have to defer to others that have more expertise in the security aspect of this. But what I will say is I think that if the U.S. is going to maintain relevance in this market, we need to be part of the technology ecosystem. Being part of the technology ecosystem means at least having some role in the digital infrastructure, and cloud increasingly is a critical component of that. So I think security concerns are obviously important, but I think as you look at this market in 10 to 15 years, we just also have to think about where is our place in the market, and are we making the kinds of investments now to ensure that we can succeed in the future.
Okay, one final question here. Looking at where the UK, the European Union, and China, where they have developed agreements, they've kind of made it where the U.S.'s share of the marketplace in Africa is much smaller. Can you quickly comment on the economic implications of that, and maybe what you see coming down the road because of that?
Well, I think you're right to highlight that issue, Congressman. Is currently the U.S. is number 3 in as a share of Africa's imports, and just barely ahead of India. And it's hard to think that that's not, to some large extent, a consequence of the fact that Europe, China, India, and even Turkey have had really focused, aggressive strategies regarding trade in Africa, and it's resulted in agreements, it's resulted in deals and contracts, and just an overall larger commercial footprint. So if we want to compete with that, we've got to be engaged. Or I think that the trend that we've seen in terms of declining foreign direct investment and declining volumes of trade will continue.
Okay, thank you. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.